Everyone, welcome back, and today we're going to be talking about scope creep. So for those of you new to the topic of scope creep, it's uncontrolled increases in scope in terms of what you have to deliver. Your scope is what it is that you're going to be delivering on your project. And so when this keeps increasing uncontrollably, that is scope creep. There's a difference between scope creep and just change. I mean, change is the only constant. There's always going to be something that has to be changed, but there's a difference between changing and having scope creep. So scope creep is not okay. Change you can manage. So the idea is for scope creep is that you have a project you're working on, and ever so often the deliverable keeps changing. So let's say, for example, you're working on one product, all of a sudden it's become three products. Let's say you're going to build one screen, now you're building a whole slew of screens. So things have just been incrementally increasing, and it's just making the deliverable more complex, and there's no control over that change. It's just anything goes. you know that's scope creep, and you don't want to have that. So we're going to talk about the causes of it and the way you can identify it early so that you can mitigate against it. Number one, I'm just reading through my notes here, so don't mind if I'm looking down. The number one reason for scope creep or cause of scope creep are impulsive, bright ideas. Now it's great to have a flash of light go off in your brain, and you're like, this would be so cool, this would be the greatest idea ever. And that happens to the best of us. Even in a meeting, you might be there with the CEO or with some upper management, and they come up with some idea that they think is the best, and all of a sudden it becomes a part of the project, but nobody stopped to think about the impact. And so now you've agreed to something and you got to deliver it, and it's like more complicated than you thought. So impulsiveness of the bright idea is really the cause and the problem, and you need to look out for these things. If you're in a meeting and you hear, oh, let's also do this, your ears should be perking up, or you're like, oh my god, that is the start of scope creep. Not to say you're going to say no, but always be like ready to take a step back and say, okay, let us go and research this. Let's go and find out the implications of this on the project timeline and so on. So you're just going to be more alert when you hear people start making statements like, oh yeah, let's add this, and I think it would be great if we could also adds. Those are words that you should be looking out for, because they indicate that you're adding to the scope and you're increasing what it is that needs to be delivered, and you got to guard against that. The other thing that always or often leads to scope creep is in the process design gap. So let's say you conceptualize a process, and as you're going through it, you're walking through it with the team, you identify gaps. Now, the real cause could be requirements that weren't done properly in the first place. Because if you did the proper requirements analysis and elicitation analysis, your process really shouldn't have that many gaps. But we're all human, things happen. So let's say you're going through your process, you're walking through your process flow, and they realize that there's a gap here. Now, that's not the problem. We can always come up with ideas to fix that gap. But it's when those ideas introduce new things that will complicate what you're trying to accomplish. So if there's anything in there that's different from the original scope, that's adding to what you originally wanted to do, then that is a source of scope creep, and you need to be able to identify that early. Say, hey, but let's say you want to build a software that will be like I love to use a lead generation system example. So you're taking in leads off the internet and you're funneling them to different areas. So let's say you're taking leads for buying or renting a house. So they put the information in, and you're going to send them to the rent funnel or the buy funnel. Now let's say you have this in a process flow, and they're like, well, what if they wanted to do a rent to own? We should add a rent to own funnel as well. Now you could go and say, yeah, that's a cool idea, but rent to own is going to be not just an extra funnel. You don't have to think of the process to handle rent to own. And so it's not as easy as, okay, we're going to just send it over there. It might be more complicated than that. So that's kind of adding to the original scope of what you had planned to do. You had planned to do rent and buy, now you're doing rent, buy, and rent to own. So not to say you can't do it, but always be conscious that these bright ideas come with implications, and you have to be ready to do that, and that might impact your project timeline and the resources you have available to get it done. Screen mockups and wireframe improvements. So everybody knows that when you're doing a screen mockup, it's such a visual activity that people always have differences of opinion. They always argue on color, they argue on placement of different elements, they argue on just how it flows. So, UX design is its own field, but when you do mock-ups, there's always an opportunity for people to say, I think it would be better if we added a table that showed some data from different places. Now, you're not worried too much about moving elements that already exist around. That's not really the big challenge. The challenge here is when people start adding elements that require data that you didn't have before. So when they want to add new data elements, that's where you got to be very careful to make sure they're not increasing the scope. Over-promising. Oh my goodness, this is one of them that's like a losing battle. Like, you fight this one and you just can't win. Salespeople overpromise a lot. Managers overpromise a lot. Like, you get into a meeting and you might feel cowed or pressured because of, you might be with C-level executives who expect a certain thing. And so you agree to it and you don't even know if you can actually deliver it. You know what I mean? Just to save your, do some CYA. So overpromising is a great way to increase the scope, because now that you've promised, you kind of have to deliver, and that probably wasn't what you promised, was probably not a part of the original scope, so it's something else to look out for. New strategies and regulations. So this is one that you don't really have much control over. So for example, if you're in an industry that's heavily regulated like finance, and there's a new rule by the CFPB that says, hey, you need to now collect certain data and report at certain times, and you're midway in your project, all of a sudden you got to stop and make sure you meet this regulation. That's not something that you can really control, but it is scope creep because you didn't anticipate it. It wasn't something that you had planned to do originally, and now the project has to be delayed to accommodate this new regulation. So it is a source. It's sneaky, but it's almost uncontrollable. Another one is management strategy. So you might be working on a project and the aim of the project was to increase sales, right? And you just wanted to get, more sales and new customers. And then somewhere in the middle, management decides what we need to do is retain the customer that we already have. So it's now customer retention. So now you're working on the customer service as opposed to sales, aggressive sales. So that's something that you probably can't control either, because you do work for the company, you got to do what they want. So, it's going to change the scope of your ongoing project. And it is sneaky because sometimes you don't know about these decisions until after they're made and it just filters down to you. But it's a part of working in the corporate world. So that is a problem. Another big problem for scope creep, that causes scope creep, is not allotting enough time to do the proper analysis up front. I cannot tell you how big a problem this is. This is really a big one, because a lot of time people are very anxious to start the project. They want to start right away, and so they rush into it and they come up with stuff, but they haven't spent a lot of time researching the impact and all the data points and the data that they need and all the different things that are involved with the project. So they get into it and start working on it, and when they get midway, they realize, oh, yeah, we didn't think about that. And you start raising questions like, we have to go back and do that. So in software projects in particular, this is a big problem, because you might find that you're working on a project that depends on some other project, right? And your project has its defined scope. The other project that you're waiting on outputs from goes off and do their own thing. When you guys come together and you need to take their output to make it into to use it for your project, you realize they didn't do this, they didn't do that. This thing is hard coded. You can't change the values here. So you find that enough time wasn't spent up front, especially between different teams, to make sure that each of the teams understand what the other team needs to be able to work synergistically. You know what I mean? So not spending time up front, making sure everything that you need is properly thought out, that definitely leads to scope creep. Because when you get into your project, you realize we got to do over stuff. Things have to be done over. That delays it and makes a big mess. So spend the time. A lot of times it's not up to you as a business analyst, but if you can push back at any level to say, hey, what about this? We really should think about this. And if you get good feedback, great. If you don't, you just have to go with the flow. But this is a problem. We really have to start spending more time up front to save ourselves from expensive errors later on. So that's a source of scope creep. Another one is focusing on the product value and not on the business value. What do I mean by this? I mean, if you're working in a situation where you have a product that you need to deliver, and you're working on making sure it's the most valuable product and it has all the features and so on. This happens a lot in software projects. And you're putting all these nice to have features and you do these little bells and whistles and everything is great for the product. But the business value isn't there. You didn't focus on what the business is trying to accomplish. You focus on what the product can have. So you added too many things in there for the product benefit, not for the business benefit. So it makes your scope always increase because you always want to add new things. You always want to add things that, this would be so cool. We're already in there writing the code. We should just add this little piece of code. It's gonna be great. So you got to keep a check on that to make sure you're focusing on the right value. So everything you put in there is the MVP, the minimal valuable product. You don't need to be building a car when you can build a skateboard, so that's how it is. Another one that causes sneaky scope creep is not defining scope in the first place. Many times we get into projects and everybody kind of understands what needs to be done. So there is some kind of scope. People understand that they need to develop something. What we don't have is a defined checkpoint, bullet point list. Hey, we're going to do this, and this. We don't have that. So because of that, everybody walks away with some idea in their head of what they're going to do, but it might be different for each person. So not defining a scope, not writing it down, not communicating it clearly to the team is a reason for scope creep. Not having a defined scope is like you're not having scope creep. You're just having a continuous original scope. So the scope keeps growing, but it is the original scope. You know what I mean? So get a scope document whenever you start a project so that everybody can be clear what you will be doing and what you will not be doing, because that's important as well. So those are my 8. I know there are others. 8 is not the full breadth of all that can happen. So you can leave in your comments if there's any ones I left out. And also what to do about these scope creep issues. The first thing we need to do is to be flexible. Don't treat scope creep or don't treat changes as scope creep all the time. Like, don't feel like you can't change because, we agreed to this and this is all we're going to do. Change is constant and we have to be flexible. But you got to manage that change. You got to make sure that it's controlled. So you need to have a change control process and work that process. So the good thing about change control is that you can defend when a project goes over its deadline. Hey, we had to do this and this and this, and here is the request that we had to change, and this is why, we are where we are. So having control is what you do. It's not to say that you're rigid and you won't change. It's just that you have to manage and control that change. So I hope you found this video useful. Please check out my website, Karaleise.com, where I talk about issues to do with project management and business analysis and IT in general, and have a Facebook page, Karaleise, so facebook.com/Karaleise, and you can follow me on Instagram. Please subscribe. It's very easy. Like, I'm here talking to my camera and I'm hoping that when I upload this, people like it, but I don't know, right? I don't know. So if you like it, just like it. That way I will know. So thank you very much, and I will see you next time. Take care. Bye.